Great stuff. So a warm welcome to Richard Swart onto the Manufacturing Leaders podcast. Really excited to have Richard on, someone I've tracked down for months on end and been highly recommended. So welcome. So Richard is now MD of Berger Closures, and recently retired, forgive me if it's wrong, the group quality director for the whole group. Is that right, European side or?
Yes, and global sales.
Global sales, perfect, excellent. So we'll dig all around that, and I can't wait to talk about your journey and everything you do for manufacturing, which is huge. But first things first, what does it mean to you to be a leader?
I think the answer to that is, what does it mean to be a good leader? And I don't necessarily claim to be a good leader, but for me, a good leader is somebody who can empathize, listen to others, consult, assess data, do analysis. I like to gather different opinions and then decide and make decisions, and in due course review those decisions if need be.
Do you think that's something that you've learned to do? Because I completely agree, and I think that's something you get better at. But when you first start off as a manager, that can be difficult to do because you're running on emotions a little bit more and less experience, aren't you?
Yes, I think that's a fair comment. I started off in my position that I've just defaulted to. I started off as a 26-year-old in 1988, with no experience actually in manufacturing, engineering, and so on. And I think you learn the hard way as you go, because you do tend to be more emotional, and you do have stereotypical ways or views of how a manager should be.
100%. And your career is amazing, what you achieved in manufacturing. I can't wait to talk about how you've got there. Let's take it right back to the start. And we're right in saying we're going right back to South Africa all those years ago. Is that right? Is it?
Well, yeah, I arrived from South Africa in Durham in 1988. In South Africa, I was a journalist. I was also, I would say, a student activist at my university in the anti-apartheid days and so on. And in those days, I have to say, what it meant to be a leader is not to be popular, don't court popularity, but try and do what is right and follow your conscience, and try and stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves necessarily. And take principled positions on issues of concern that conflicted with one's moral values. And that's, to me, in many cases today, also is what I recognize and respect and look for in leaders, to enable me to class them as good.
Yeah. I like that point, and to be really transparent, something I've tried to improve on throughout the years, but still suffer from time to time. And I think when you come up as whoever you come up with, when you start being a manager, it's difficult. And I think there's an element now of the people pleasing side, which I think can sometimes make it difficult to be a manager because you're no longer someone's friend. Have you seen that? You've worked with a lot of managers. Have you seen the shift there now towards, where's the balance between doing what's right and then being too much of a people pleaser, trying to make people happy? It's a difficult balance, isn't it?
I think it is a very difficult balance, and I think it's important not to go out of your way to be a people pleaser, but certainly to respect people. And perhaps one of my greatest learning experiences in my life, I spent time in Los Angeles. I went to high school in Wisconsin, USA, for a year, and then I ended up later on spending 6 months in Los Angeles. But I did kind of laboring work, if you like. And in my case, working on a jackhammer, breaking up concrete slabs, which is totally contrary to my who I am and my aspirations.
Yeah.
But it was a huge learning experience, because from that point on, I fully respected anybody doing any kind of work. And that put me in a good position, I like to think, dealing with people from all sections of society. And that helps with the empathy and how one communicates. And journalism also did that for me as well, mind you, because you also dealt with all cross sections of society and situations, and that also helped. So empathy is huge with all people, and hopefully one can avoid the trap of arrogance and a condescending approach in dealing with people.
How beneficial do you think it's been for you working in with different cultures and different countries? Because I guess moving to Durham, and for those watching not listening, Durham is the background behind where you are. Obviously, very proud of where you're from now. How beneficial has that been able to work with different nationalities and different cultures? Because that's obviously a big part of what you've done.
I think hugely beneficial, and something to be recommended to everybody if they get the opportunity. And I was fortunate opportunity came my way, some of it willingly and some of it not. But I was fortunate to grow up in South Africa, which is very multicultural and so much better for it. I then got employment with a German manufacturing business, family owned, and it's now stock listed. I had the privilege of heading the company in Germany for 3.5 years. I set the business up in China over a 5-year period. I've engaged with customers in Saudi Arabia, in Havana, Cuba, Turkey, pretty much across the board. And that has taught me a lot about different cultures. And I think my summing up of the situation is you've got to respect the differences. You cannot think you are better or worse, or your culture is better or worse. We are different. If you respect those differences, you will get on with different cultures and different people.
Yeah, and I bet I imagine that benefited your own management repertoire from being able to deal with so many different situations for people, different walks of life, which is which is interesting.
Yes, and I have to say, I mean, one aspires to that. One is not perfect, and we all have our failings, and I am no exception. So one often knows what to do, but sometimes emotions perhaps do get the better of one from time to time.
And you've obviously progressed to an excellent rate into a very, very senior position, and one people aspire to be. Was that always the goal for you? Was it a case of just one day at a time, or did you have these aspirations to lead a business like this?
No, for me, it was a case of one day at a time. I took this role as a 26-year-old in 1988, coming from journalism in South Africa to manufacturing, engineering, knowing very little about it. And I had to learn pretty much on the hop. And my wife and I came over for 2 years max, and we are now about to hit 35 years in Durham. So one's career is just taking its natural steps, or as one follows one's different interests in the industry I'm in, but plus in the region and country in which I live and love, which is the UK and the Northeast.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. And in terms of Berger Closures as a business, I imagine gone through various different challenges and different steps throughout your time there. Is that been an interesting journey, I imagine, getting to where you are today?
Well, I'm back to where I started now today, actually. So I've almost gone full circle by choice. But no, it's been a massive learning curve. I mean, what Berger Closures does is actually an essential product used throughout the world. So we make millions of metal closing rings that hold lids onto drums and barrels, plastic, steel, and fiber. And you will see these in the background in news stories. You'll see them on trucks. You'll see them in the backyards. But they transport chemicals, pharmaceuticals, oil, paint, nuclear waste around the world. So it's an essential product. So it's been a fascinating learning curve for me. I have to learn the hard way on the production, on the quality, on the customers' requirements, and the need for compliance to international regulations to ensure the safe transport of hazardous goods and sensitive materials around the world.
Excellent. What's kept you there? Because in a world where a job for life isn't, is very rare now, and there's opportunity out there for people, what's kept you there, interested, wanting to challenge yourself, wanting to challenge the business? What would you put that down to?
I don't think I saw it as a job for life. It's just transpired pretty much that way. I mean, I was in employment 4 or 5 years before taking this job, and I think it's the journey of life. So what was very satisfying and a huge learning curve, given I had no experience, was to set the business up from scratch. Was to learn how to deal and employ people, employment contracts, how learn about the health and safety requirements, learn about sales, learn about purchasing, build the customer and supply relationships in the UK and around the world, and report to what was then a family-owned business. So that in itself was a huge, challenging, stimulating and rewarding experience. And I guess that gradually I got incentive and encouragement along the way. We were making good progress, and we very quickly became the UK's market leader. And also, I would say within the Berger Group, we are one of the smallest, along with our colleagues in Barcelona. But we are well respected in our industry and within the group. So it's been a lot of natural satisfaction, I suppose, gained with hard experience over the years.
How much of the challenges changed over the years? I mean, I sat on a round table this week with manufacturing leaders and discussed various challenges: supply chain, recruitment, training, investment, automation, loads of challenges. And some felt like they were new challenges. Some felt like they were challenges that probably have been there for a long time. Based on where we are today versus where we started, how have the challenges over time changed, do you think, now?
I would make a distinction between the last 3 years, i.e. COVID and pre-COVID. So for me, a significant change was the difference working for a family-owned business as to what we are versus what we are now, which is a stock-listed, disciplined reporting company. So the decision-making process and the reporting process are hugely different, and both of them are to be respected. So that was a huge challenge. With the family-owned business, the owner can make a decision within a few seconds, rightly or wrongly. When you've got external shareholders, and you have to be far more prudent and cautious on the decision-making process and the justification for making multiple decisions. So it's intense reporting, and certainly more accountability. So that is a huge change for me. And then the last 3 years have been a relentless process of seemingly never-ending curveballs. So, in fact, I started with 2016, but in practical terms, it was in terms of our particular business, it was 2020. So you had Brexit, which was huge, and we've never quite recovered from that. We've had COVID. And for a manufacturer, of course, you cannot work from home. We had to adapt over the course of that weekend when the announcement was made to create conditions where colleagues would be encouraged to come to work and work on machines, yet to deal with those impacted by COVID illnesses and their family and themselves and so on and so forth. That then, COVID then led to a quiet period for us, but a very brief quiet period, mind you, because we are an essential business. We managed to get through COVID in reasonable condition. However, what COVID did bring about was supply chain disruption, shortages of products, shortages of components from abroad, container displacement, significant, sometimes weekly price increases, which meant you had to change your own prices in the UK and globally in my global sales role on almost a monthly basis, because all the rules were torn up. We were into the unknown. So it was huge. And then, as you would know well, significant problem, very evident last year, a shortage of people. shortage of skills,
Yeah.
and to some extent that was caused, we understand, by some in the UK, something like 500,000 people taking themselves out of the workforce because of COVID.
Mhm.
And in principle, a similar situation in many other countries. But the UK had the added aggravation of Brexit,
Yeah.
where we lost a huge number of people across sectors. And we've never really recovered from that. So what that has created and contributed towards is significant wage inflation,
Yep.
far in excess, I suspect, of what Brexiteers wanted. They always claimed that immigrants kept local wages depressed. And I think they're regretting those claims because, as we see and read, we've got massive issues on wages across the board. We've got strike action, we've got inflation, rampant inflation, we've got interest rates at rising levels. And for business, these are huge curveballs we've got to juggle with. And I think many of us are simply quite tired and exhausted and stressed by what has been a relentless 3 years since the onset of COVID, with different problems, different curveballs coming. You have Ukraine, Russia, you have the impact of that, of course, on energy prices. And those have also served in some industries like ours, served to depress the market because many companies cannot supply to Russia and actually cannot supply to Ukraine. So sometimes their competitors from different countries are willing to supply Russia. And that has created stresses in the industry, and not only our industry, but across the board in many other industries too, I suspect.
Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, what you've just talked about there is complete on the money, and it's almost not talked about enough. It's almost not, that Brexit is a key talking point that was almost COVID was a smokescreen, a perfect smokescreen. And I think the delayed effects of Brexit, people I agree, are actually feeling more now than ever, because it's like you say, the issues we have now with inflation, with salaries, and the shortage of people, it's becoming more of an issue now than ever it was.
Indeed, and one hears to this day, and to some extent one can understand it. People say we must move on from Brexit, we must stop talking about Brexit, and so on. And I actually disagree with that. I think we need to call it out for what it is, and use the word Brexit. And people need to see and judge for themselves what they perhaps missed and were misled about during the referendum, because they must see the facts now. And the reality is we haven't become better off. We've become a marginalized trading nation, as we know. The state's role and the government's role for business is to create an enabling environment. But what they've actually done with Brexit so far is quite the reverse. It has become a disabling environment. We have extra bureaucracy. We've got more red tape. We've got wage inflation, and not only due to Brexit, to be fair, but significantly due to Brexit. We've got competitiveness being undermined, and of course, on the day after the referendum, the pound crashed and has never really recovered. And by the pound crashing to the levels it's more or less still at now, that created inflation, because the UK, whether we like it or not, is by far a net importer of goods. And so that has contributed to inflation over time, and it has undermined our competitiveness. And so now we have this desire by some in government to remove all EU regulations and standards off our statute book by the end of this year, which is utter madness. Because if we do that, many of us will lose business, because we have people supplying us because we have EU standards and so on. And they will not, many of them will, if they have the choice, will choose not to export to the UK. And it will complicate our exports outside of the UK if we change or deviate significantly from EU regulations. So it's utter madness. And many of the EU regulations are, in fact, global standards. So it's utter madness. And this is destabilizing and worrying for business. And arguably, because of all these factors. The UK has suffered since the referendum in 2016. Where the level of business and investment is not what it was before the referendum, and we are now lagging behind our fellow members of the G7 group and other developed nations. So business is struggling for stability and a framework that gives us confidence, but we are not seeing that. We are currently seeing high corporation tax rates, inflation rates, instability. We've had, I think, we've had 4 prime ministers, I think, since 2016. Somebody said to me the other day, and it's true, we've had 10 ministers of justice in 10 years. And I suspect similar stats in other ministries. Mm-hmm. And all of this doesn't inspire confidence in the general public and the government of the day, and certainly undermines business confidence and our desire to invest and plan for the future. Yeah. And something's got to give. We can't continue like this. We need significant change. We need stability. And for me personally, I'm quite happy to contemplate a Labour government under Keir Starmer, beg your pardon, as boring as he might be. For me, boring is beautiful.
Stability, isn't it? Yeah.
Based on what we've had since 2016, it's been a charade of incompetent leaders and decisions that have impacted us in business and the public at large. So we just need stability. We need a change. We need a fresh look at things.
Yeah, I agree. It's an absolute mess, and I've worked in manufacturing for probably 15 years now, and I love it. But I've never seen as many challenges as I've seen right now. And you're right, it's people, and this is why it's good to talk about, because I think it's still swept under the carpet. People don't talk about it enough. Again, when I was talking to leaders, they talk about the amount of work now which should be in the UK but is outsourced outside the UK, just simply down to cost, because companies I get it as well. Companies have got to do what they got to do. They're getting all these energy costs, corporation tax rising, and they'd love to bring the work into the UK. They'd love to have all the supply chain in the UK, but they're forced out of it now simply because of the cost, the market, and people are forcing to go to a place like China. And that's only going to get worse unless government steps in and does something about it. It's a mess.
Indeed, I mean, and China is a good example. I mean, I in my role at the Chamber of Commerce on the particular subject of China, and this I think goes back 10 or 15 years, we campaigned for what we called reshoring.
Yeah.
At that time, and I think it was under David Cameron, it was all about actually working closer with China and actually sending work and giving work to China, and setting off key infrastructure projects in the UK to China. And just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with doing international business, and we are much better off for it. But I and many others felt we were far too quickly. We were in a rush to do business elsewhere rather than develop what we had here, and so on. And so that whole China policy is another example. We were seeking very close links to China, and now we are much more hands off with China, and that is confusing for business. Our policies change dramatically according to the government or prime minister of the day.
100%. Given the fact that these are challenges that every manufacturer will have right now, and to some extent, some of this stuff is out of our hands. How do we deal with the hand we're given? How do manufacturers navigate through? You take supply chain as a key example now. The fact that the cost, the complexity of someone's supply chain. How does a company like Berger Closures navigate through these challenges? I guess, what have you done, or have you done anything in the last 12 months to try and resolve some of these issues?
I think you've got to look at each industry and business, I suppose, and product range on its own. There's the different dynamics in the different industries, and certainly, as we know, and we are very proud of the UK over the years, has been a very proud global manufacturer of major brands across the world, and many of those big businesses and big brands can survive well the many challenges I've identified. The brands speak volumes and are not necessarily cost sensitive or less cost sensitive than for others. In terms of our particular group, the challenge has been for Berger UK, the currency has been an issue. So if we import in products, yes, it's pushed our prices up. Also, if we are partaking in global contracts or European contracts, Brexit has caused a major hiccup because you have many importers of our products reluctant to go through the hassle of the paperwork and the delays and so on that Brexit has created. They were very comfortable with the hassle-free process of shipping from here to a range of other countries in Europe as easy as one could ship to Manchester or Birmingham. So that's impacted on our business, certainly, and in terms of pricing and competitiveness, because we have to comply quite often with contract prices. So, it depends on one's margins and how the business is set up. So for our business, it has caused certainly damage in our industry and our competitiveness. What is very positive, and I'm very proud to say, is our quality has been second to none, and our service, and that has been very, very helpful with many customers abroad and within the group. They've been willing to deal with these additional hindrances because they appreciate the quality and service of the team here in Berger UK, and that is important.
Apologies for interrupting this podcast for a very quick 30-second pitch of my business. Theo James are a specialist manufacturing and engineering recruitment search firm based in Seaham in the Northeast. If you're looking for any staff or a new opportunity yourself, from a semi-skilled level right the way up to C-suite executive, then please get in touch. We have a specialist consultant in each discipline ready to help. I'm extremely proud of what we've built over the years, and I'd love to extend that service out to you. Thank you. Enjoy the podcast. Right, excellent stuff. I'm really interested in understanding your journey of the networking side, the forums, the NECC, something you've been involved with for many years, and obviously at a very senior level. Is that something, networking is something, and being involved in these types of organizations, has that always been a passion of yours, or how did that come about?
I think it has always been a passion of mine. I am a social animal. I think those who are at school with me will back me up for better or for worse. Good stories and bad stories. But no, I mean, the fact is I came here not knowing anybody. I'd been to London. My father brought us to the UK many times for holidays, but it tended to be to London in the south. So I didn't know anybody in the north, certainly in business. So my wife and I arrived completely fresh. The then development company, it was Northern Development Company, they organized accommodation for us just outside Durham. We didn't know anybody apart from the local development company officials, and we had to start from scratch. So you had no sense of value even. So we had heating, electric heating, and of course in South Africa where we lived, there was no need for heating. So my first 6 months, I had to get concessions from the Northern Electric, as it was, to help me delay payments to them because we left the heating on all day and couldn't pay the bills. So networking became very important, and I joined the Chamber of Commerce as a member and started going to meetings and so on, and gradually built up a network and I got a sense of what the Northeast was about, and got to a position where I could phone contractors who I could use for the business, with whom I had some sort of personal relationship. And gradually one thing led to another, and you had a reasonably well-established network over time. So you have to work at it quite hard, particularly being a foreigner or an immigrant or I think in some languages, an incomer, I think they call it. So that was very important. What was very valuable was participation in what still is going today. It's known as common purpose. And that is still very, very strong in the Northeast. And I was one of the early members of Common Purpose in 1994. And I recommend this to all in business, if they have the opportunity to join the program or send colleagues on the program for enrichment and learning about what makes the country and the region tick.
Interesting.
The common purpose, in my case, it was a 12-month program, and one day a month would be a focus with other business people on local and national categories. So it could be on the health service, could be on education, could be on local government, could be on the justice system, and so on. So they covered all the topics, and from that 12 months period, you had a pretty good view of how your society ticks, and the key players within. And that for me was a huge learning curve, particularly as somebody coming from outside.
Yeah, and that's something that still runs to this day.
That goes on to this day, and I'm very happy to say I'm back involved now, sharing experiences to new candidates, and young business people across the region and across the country. So they have a full-time a manager in the region. They are always looking for people to participate. It's become a hugely successful program across the country and abroad. Okay. But the whole idea is to help and enrich business people, in particular from public sector and private sector, to understand each other's positions and what makes the region and the country tick.
Yeah,
I strongly recommend that. Yeah,
because I think you tend to find people who are specialists in their field, but not necessarily well-rounded in terms of the other aspects of life and society. So I guess that ticks boxes, doesn't it?
That ticks the boxes. It just helps us understand how we all fit in and how we make the local economy work.
Yeah,
the national economy. Yeah.
And the Advanced Manufacturing Forum, obviously, that's specific to manufacturing as a sector. How important has that been for you and Berger Closures and developing the business, would you say?
Well, I became chairman of the Advanced Manufacturing Forum about 2 years ago, not being a member before that, but being having a very good relationship with the founder of the Advanced Manufacturing Forum. He was a guy, Jeff Ford, head of Ford Aerospace and Engineering. Yep. He set it up 15 years ago, I guess, and sadly he passed away 4 or 5 years ago. And he was an inspirational figure for me. But his successors in the AMF approached me to help chair it and to help run it. And it's been a pleasure and a delight. And what we have seen with a great team in place on the board and a great general manager, and we are experiencing record growth in membership, amazing high quality networking events, and business to business benefit and trading. So you actually seen hard evidence of one company buying from another, right, and relationships building. So they have a very strong presence on LinkedIn, and we have a range of large and small members, and by and large we've got really amazing customer satisfaction with tangible benefits.
Excellent.
And we've recently partnered also with Newcastle Business School, part of Northumbria University, and that relationship also has been going from strength to strength, where we are doing surveys of members with the university, and we're holding joint events and so on, and active looking at further engagement between the private sector and the educational providers such as Newcastle Business School.
And I'm a recent convert to networking. Over the last 12 months, it's been a big part of my job, and I've really enjoyed it, and I've got endless amounts of benefits from it. But I think before that, I was a little bit skeptical. I think I kind of thought I had this vision of this very staged networking events where you kind of very forced, but actually it's been completely opposite, and that's down to the types of networks in the region. But obviously, I was one of those people who was skeptical to take a day off work or a half day off work. What would you say to people who have never networked, perhaps a leader in a manufacturing firm, and are on the fence about it? How do you think it can actually benefit businesses, apart from the working together? How else can it benefit businesses, would you say, or individuals?
Well, I think, I mean, some people would say to me, they'll introduce me to South Africans in the Northeast, or they said, I've got to meet XYZ because they are South Africans. And actually, I have very little incentive to go out of my way to meet South Africans in the Northeast. If our paths cross naturally and there's common interest, then there's an interest.
Yeah,
certainly. And I think similarly in business, regardless of nationality, you go to events and you engage with people that you may get on with, and you build on that relationship. If you see that there are possible benefits in that relationship as a supplier, as a client, or as an advisor, or even as a mentor. And so that you might not have a direct business interest with that person, but I have over the years met people that sometimes I've used as a sounding boards to help make a decision, or whether or not to use a particular company, or whether it's a particular supplier, and so on and so forth. So I think there's huge value to broaden one's horizons and hearing from other people, perhaps more experienced than oneself.
Yeah, and building that trust. You like that? What's kept you passionate for all these years? Because you're someone who still seems extremely passionate about what you do. You're chairman, mentors. You obviously, I don't know if you're workaholic, but you obviously work very hard, and I'm sure you don't have to be part of these things. So what's kept you so involved and engaged, would you say? What's the secret?
Important point for me, given what became my global role within Berger, which meant from 2009 up until last year when my global role ended. My role was abroad, so I was doing approximately 180 flights a year.
Wow.
And very little time in the UK. And UK is very much home, and Durham very much home. My children born here and schooled here, and living in the Northeast and in London. So by getting engaged in these other activity, it kept me well rooted to all issues Northeast, many issues national, and that was very important for me to try and do my best to stay aware of the challenges that we all facing in this region. But I will also add to that, I mean, prior to my travel, I've always been interested in other things, in general knowledge. I've been interested in the news, in politics, in economics, and social issues. And that's my journalistic background coming into it.
Curiosity.
He just dealt with all aspects of society, good and bad.
Yeah.
And that I've always loved, I think you're a citizen of the world. You only live once. And so the more diverse experiences you have, and sadly, many of them are life and death issues too, but you just become a better, more rounded individual. I like to think. And equally, life is a continuous learning curve. So we're continuously learning. We're learning from our mistakes, learning from others, but hopefully just being part of a wonderful journey and privilege of living in this world, I suppose.
Yeah, love that. Excellent stuff. Who's been an influence on your career, your life, I guess, is would that could be outside of work, it could be someone within work, someone's had an impact on your career, would you say?
I like to think in terms of my value system, as imperfect as it might be, is my father. Mm-hmm. My father was a very principled lawyer and an anti-apartheid politician in South Africa, and he lost many elections for the right reasons within a white electorate, campaigning against apartheid. He got a lot of abuse. We as a family got a lot of death threats. At school, we got picked on by teachers and other colleagues and other friends and so on. We had to be accountable for all sorts of views to that. But he taught me very much the need to stand up, if you like, for the underdog as much as one can, and to do what is right rather than what is popular. So I think I give him a lot of credit. Sadly, he passed away immediately before COVID in South Africa. Then in business, a very memorable and colorful character was the family owner of this business, who was my first boss, if you like. Very tough guy, a very colorful guy, but he was very clear on what he wanted and how the business should be run. He was also very fair, and that I respected, and I learned a lot from him. And I haven't forgotten that. He was a person who said, if you say your word is gold, and he would do business on a handshake rather than on a written contract. Yeah. And he did that for hundreds of thousands of euros with a lot of our key customers at the time on a handshake. Wow. And I've never forgotten that. And it was trust. And that taught me a lot too on how to do business.
Yeah. You can tell you embody that in terms of what's right, what's fair, morally, doing doing the right thing by, and in that, that really comes across. So I can see that influence is very much rubbed off you. And I imagine that difficult at times situations upbringing, probably a level of resilience sort of ingrained into you, I guess, to sort of deal with what's in front of you.
I think there's no question of that, and that doesn't make me an easy person, I have to say, because there are some situations I find very difficult to accept. I do hold people to account if they say something. I do, and don't deliver. And sadly nowadays, what one often has to do in situations is what is discussed on the telephone. One often has to put it down in an email afterwards to confirm the conversation, and quite often in particular situations you get a different view, and that is, for me, is quite sad, and I find that difficult to accept. And I'm continually trying to hold the bar as high as I can, and to maintain respect for. In our company, we've got a code of conduct, which is good, but shouldn't really be necessary. It should be a given. But many companies do that, and that is a good reference point to hold people to account.
Yeah, I like that, and people know where they're at. So no, and look, I've really enjoyed digging around the journey. I've got some quick-fire questions, but thank you initially for all that. It's great. So some quick-fire questions, not always quick-fire, mind. What are 3 things or 3 words that make up a good leader? First things that come to mind.
It's a real struggle to find 3 words to do that. But I would like to say integrity, and come back to the empathy bit. And I would like to say principles.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. The next one you've already answered. It's best manager you've worked with and why. Unless there's anyone else that's worth mentioning that you've perhaps worked with who had impact.
There's particular clients that I worked with, and particularly in my early days, in my 30s. One of the purchasing managers for one of my customers in the UK, very, very tough, very fair. Yeah. He forced me. I had to be on my toes in my arguments. He forced me to do my homework a lot better when presenting, dealing in price discussions and so on and so forth. So I'll never forget that, and I credited him to his face as we got to know each other better, and when he retired. And a similar situation with another colleague, and this also goes back about 15 years, with a French purchasing manager for a European group. He was in a similar vein to the UK guy, and he also kept me on my toes. And I learned so much from both these guys, from their professionalism, their respect for detail, and their fairness in the outcome. And they empathized with me as a young guy coming into the business, and I fully engaged and got on really well with them. But I give them full credit.
Love that. Excellent stuff.
Me, yeah.
Going back to that 26-year-old, if you could give him one lesson, knowing everything you know now, what would it be? From your first days into management, what do you say?
Gosh, I think one good lesson, well, the basic lesson is, and I learned this lesson, having made many mistakes, is don't be arrogant, don't be presumptuous, don't be presumptuous. Respect and empathize with other people.
Yeah,
is I think the lesson I've learned, although I forget that lesson every now and then. But that is very important for me in my life's journey.
brilliant. And just finally, obviously we've discussed about the many challenges in manufacturing right now, and there are a lot of those. How do we improve? If there's one thing we can change about manufacturing to improve it, what would it be? If we could wave a magic wand.
A constant challenge now, but actually it's been around for many years, is try to get young people interested in manufacturing. And there's been constant efforts to work closer with schools and to sell manufacturing and the jobs that manufacturing offers in a more effective way. I don't know if we've seen great results on that or great progress, but I think we're up against technology, we're up against IT, we're up against mobile phones, social media, computer games, and so on. And I think younger generation, I think the struggle's got harder to get younger people into manufacturing, and that's a worry for the future. So there's no quick answer to that point to a question, but it's something I think many of us are aware of, but we don't have the answers. Other than the fact we might have a sexy business or sexy product range, or we might have attractive technology that attracts young people, but for many of us, we don't. Yeah. We are what we are. We're trying to do better. We're trying to make the business attractive. We are making changes to accommodate and so on, but it's quite often not enough, and our options are limited. So it's an ongoing struggle.
The real challenge, it's something I'm very passionate about. I was a careers advisor before I came into recruitment, and 100% agree. We need to do more at school level, at a real young level, the parents and young children, to change the stigma and the mentality, and make people aware of what opportunities there are in manufacturing. It's not this old school, necessarily an old school, dirty engineering environment all the time. There's all sorts, and there's all sorts of avenues and things you can become in manufacturing. And you mentioned that there's so much technology now coming into it that it should be a selling point for people who are savvy and dexterous and all that.
Indeed. And also, I think the important point we mustn't forget is perhaps my earlier point when I was breaking up concrete pavements with a jackhammer. Not all jobs are attractive, but having a job should be better than not having a job. So not all manufacturing jobs are attractive, and that certainly includes aspects of our operation in the UK. But somebody's got to do the work. We've got to create an environment that can attract people, but it shouldn't be so difficult. And I think people have to be grateful for many jobs and appreciate the work ethic. It's better to work than not to work. And I think it's sad that I think in the UK we have a lot of people working the system who are not really willing to work, who are comfortable not working for whatever reason. And that comes back to the earlier point we were discussing about labor and skill shortages. The whole idea was to open more jobs up to UK nationals, but we haven't really seen that. And that is creating a problem for all of us, whether we manufacturing, banks, recruitment, universities, NHS, whatever. We are short, desperately short of people, and desperately short quite often of young people. So the challenges are huge, and we need a more stable approach, I think, in government, a more coherent approach and a more stable government to try and deliver a cohesive approach to these many challenges.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just finally, sort of Berger closure, but what's the next plans for the next sort of 12 to 18 months? What's on the agenda? More of the same, things happening?
Well, at the moment, things are tough. So we had a very positive year, funnily enough, in 2021, following the unlocking of the global economy. There was a huge demand, and things, and that started to wane in the first half of last year. And many now say, and correctly, and certainly us, what we are saying is actually we've got to measure ourselves now in reality against 2019, because COVID just upset everything, all the norms. So at the moment, we are very happy to retain what we've got. We've got a number of new opportunities we are working on. One or two of them have been delayed due to cutbacks. We do a lot of nuclear work for nuclear disposal with nuclear waste companies, indirectly for Sellafield and so on. And we have significant other projects in the pipeline, but the name of the game is to tighten the belt, manage what we have, be grateful for what we've got, and pick off the opportunities as they hopefully present themselves in a more speedy fashion than they have.
Yeah, great stuff. And look, thank you so much, Richard. I always like to summarize in terms of what I've learned, because I always learn so much on these. And you know what? A fantastic conversation around manufacturing, which I'm sure a lot of businesses will get a lot from. On a personal level, I always reflect at the end of an episode. And I think for me, it's taught me a much needed lesson about you've just got to do, as a management point of view, you've just got to do what's right and what's fair. And if that ends up being a bit of a tricky conversation and perhaps the harder conversation, then so be it. Ultimately, you've got to stick to your values, stick to your morals. And actually, sometimes having those hard conversations are probably what's best to the person as well. And I think I've, when I was listening to you thinking, you're fair, you stick to your guns, you stick to your values. And if that ends up being initially not the right, something you don't want to hear, then it's hold them accountable, and that's ultimately what you do. So that was my personal takeaway.
Indeed. And I'll just quickly add, I mean, when I did my master's, one of the management theorists I remember, or strategy theorists I remember, was a guy called Quinn. And I think it was something like, he said strategy is about, I think he said logical incrementalism. And that kind of I bought into, because, many of us are fixated with the word strategy and plans for the next 5 years and so on. And yeah, there's merit for that. But I think much of strategy is incremental. It's like a game of chess. It evolves week by week, month by month, and as circumstances change. And that's kind of a view I broadly subscribe to as well. So you've got to manage the people, you've also got to manage the strategy in the business. But quite a lot of that is really short to medium term planning, looking for the opportunities as they evolve and taking them.
Excellent. Look, thank you so much. It's been great. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Mike.